Hello and welcome to GMax Studios.
Thanks. It's my pleasure to be here. Lovely to be here too.
So we've been wanting to interview for a very long time because we've got keep getting a lot of questions about wildlife photography specifically, and we have no idea how to answer it.
Why wildlife?
So wildlife photography per se, how did it all start?
Actually, see, I don't have a basic background or education in photography. It's all self-taught. But I started my photography in 1991 in New York when I bought my first second-hand or used camera, as they say. I was still a student, struggling to make ends meet, and with the few dollars that I had saved from my teaching assistantship, I was doing a master's in chemical engineering in America from 91 to 93, and the little money that I saved, I bought two things which I don't think anybody else appreciated at home then. The first was a music system, which I had to play my CDs, and the second was a camera. And I got duped with the camera because I bought a used one and in New York, on some bylanes of New York, but I guess, and then I exchanged it for another one, and then I started my photography on my own, learning and printing and doing all kinds of things from film and whatever else you can think of. And then I got back from the US, started a business, and then the photography took a little bit of a backseat because you have to do business, right? You have to earn money.
What was that business, if I'm asking?
It was mainly software. We got into sports software. Being in that field, we come from a background of sports, so we kind of started a sports software company, which is again very new in this country, very niche at that time. In the 90s, nobody had a software company,
right,
which is doing something exclusively with sports. And then I started going to South Africa quite a lot on business. This was for the 2003 Cricket World Cup, which was coming up in South Africa. It was in the 99 to 2000 is when I started traveling.
This was with your brother?
No, actually, not with him, but it was just one of those things that he was also there in South Africa for an operation on his shoulder. And then when I went there, I started visiting national parks. And before this, we were going to our national parks and and all the other things. There was an interest in wildlife, in animals and everything else from childhood, but there was no passion for wildlife photography there. So when I started getting into South Africa in this late 90s, that's when I said, okay, I was just going as a visitor because I loved wildlife. And then suddenly I said, okay, why don't I put these two together, and started it off very seriously then. And then in 2008-09, I kind of gave up the software business, merged it with something else that completely got into photography, wildlife photography.
So it was not a conscious decision as a photographer. You just had a natural inkling towards being outdoor.
Yes, I'll tell you. The first thing is my love for animals, but it's not love for pets. I had a pet. I mean, I had pets when I was a little kid, more birds and pigeons and those kind of things. And then one day when I woke up in the morning and went around to look at my pigeons, it was completely finished, eaten by the stray cat. I said, oh, this is different, because it's a pet. The pigeon is a pet to me, but not to the cat. So I said, the cat's instinct, even though the cat was still a pet of somebody else's, but the instinct was it to kill. So that actually kindled my interest or imagination into wildlife. So photography came later. There was always this passion for me to create something, and I've never been an artist who can draw or paint or do something, but I wanted to visualize that, and whatever I visualized, I wanted to capture somewhere. And photography is that tool, and the camera is my brush, and the sensor, then film, is my canvas. So I said, okay, now here it is. I have something which I couldn't afford then in the 90s, but I mean, 80s for sure. But in the 90s, yes, a little bit. And I said, okay, now let me put this wildlife thing together. Let me put that, the photography. The photography was my first passion. And somehow here, it was ingrained probably that wildlife is my interest. So I think that came together. 2008-9, I kind of gave up the software business, merged it with something else. That completely got into photography, wildlife photography. By then I had collected a whole bunch of pictures from my Africa travels, and then one day I was sitting and there was no company, no nothing, just sitting at home with just a camera and a few of my photographs. And then I decided that what do I do with these photos? And it so happened me and my wife were just chatting, and we said, I just told her I'll make a book. She said, book? But you've never written a book. I said, it's okay, I've got the photographs, let me just do something. And then in 2008, when I started putting the pictures together, and in the form of a book, and I had no idea or experience in writing a book, but I started doing it. And then I took it to many publishers, the real established publishers in India, 2-3 people. They said, who are you? What kind of pictures, book? Who will buy all this? So that started off my passion to create a publishing company. Actually, I said, I will do this book myself. And I started putting the pictures, put it in the form of a coffee table book. And then we self-published it. Or at that time, it was a self-publication because the company was called Crab Media and Marketing. It was just 2 people and no dogs too. So it was just me and my wife, but I was the only one doing this. Then the biggest cost for doing any book is the printing cost, and the distribution and everything else is different. But then when you do that, you always think that you can do a book because your pictures are the best and stuff like that. So I said, what do I do for this printing now? How do I get my books printed? I've got it designed, I've got everything done. Then luckily for me, I don't give up. As wildlife photographers, you don't give up. See, you keep trying to get that picture which never comes, but you keep chasing. So one of the things that I did was I was talking to many companies, and Hewlett-Packard, HP, was coming out with a digital offset printer, and they were planning to launch that. So when I approached them, they were kind enough to say, we will print it on digital. And nobody until then had done any coffee table book on a digital print. And they supported me quite a lot. They gave me some few copies. And digital printing, as you know, you can print 1, you can print 100, you can print 1,000, whatever you want to, as and when you want to. So it was like print on demand. So we did about 300, and they launched the machine with this book, or the book with the machine, either way. Because they put it together, and HP actually sent it to all their, let's say, channel partners, plus their own offices, their printing division across the world, with the book, and said this is one of the wildlife books which I got. All that happened, then I sent a few out into the market here, distributors, book distribution. I had no idea about publishing business. I mean, I'm a chemical engineer with a master's degree. I did a software company, now I'm doing photography, and then I'm trying to do a book, and then I'm doing a publishing business. So it was all new. It was funny, but and then I sent it all to all these distributors. And if you are any businessman in a consumer product in India, the first thing you will realize is you will never get your money from your distributor or your reseller. That's the end of your life. You sell them 100 products, that's it. To cut that story short, what really happened was I was left with some 100 books in the house. And what do I do with these books? Okay, these are all wildlife related books, very niche. Very few people do books on wildlife. And as you all know, books take a lot of space. And in your house, you keep passing through it. Every day you see the boxes lying with books. So then I decided I'll write to all the chief ministers of the country and say, I can do a book for you. Any chief minister who wants me to do a book for their state. So I sent about 20 books. My wife said, you're wasting your money again. Instead of making money, you're wasting more money. And out of the blue, I get a call from the government of Gujarat. So it says, Commissioner of Information and Tourism or whatever. So I'm calling regarding the book that you had sent to the CM, and we want something similar to be done for Gujarat. Are you game? So they said, let's do this book. Then I went prepared as to how I would do a book for them, for the government of Gujarat, and nobody knows about wildlife of Gujarat, right? Nobody is actually showcased. So I said, I'll take it up. Then I told them I need at least a year or a little more than a year to finish a book, because I need to finish all the seasons or complete all the seasons. They said, no, it's not possible. I was in, I think, May or something. They said, you'll have to give us the book by next April. The book by next April. No, I said, wildlife book, somebody wants it in 6 months, and how do I? It's not like, making people pose, right? So I said, okay, I'll give it a shot. So we went, me and my wife, she became my assistant by default. Just the two of us, we went everywhere. Traveled the entire length and breadth of Gujarat, trying to get the wildlife. And by around February or even March of the following year, we'd got a collection of pictures. So I made a book. We printed and gave it to the government. And it so happened that book was being used by the Chief Minister's office to showcase Gujarat, the entire thing. And they said this was one of the best books that we have to showcase. And wildlife brings that awe in people. When they open a book which is lying on a coffee table of any person's house or a collector's house, the beauty about doing a book is it opens up a mind. And there's no, you can just open any page and that'll have some awe because of the wildlife. Because you'd either be seeing the animal that you know in a certain form, or an animal which you're absolutely not aware of, that it existed or amongst us. So that's the beauty of wildlife. And from then on, the Chief Minister's office gave that book away every time the delegation went either outside India or any time a delegation visited Gujarat. And that gave us a lot of, it more than anything else, I think it gave me a sense of satisfaction. And more than anything else, now I learned the art of doing a project, the art of writing a story, weaving a story, putting it in a project. If I have 100 photos, what do I do with these 100 photos? So that, I think, was an eye-opener. And all this happened around 2009-10. And the best part of it is we happened to do 2 other books for Gujarat later. One's in 2012, one Kutch. And those were different, not just wildlife, but a whole lot of genres. And just the 2 of us going across, which eventually was also released by the Chief Minister, then now Prime Minister. So the point of, you said wildlife photography, nobody talks about it. And now, when I was traveling around Gujarat and probably around India trying to collect all these pictures, there were very few. There were hardcore wildlife photographers too, who have put in their lives in getting that beautiful pictures. From the time photography started, there have been wildlife photographers in India too, and some doyens of wildlife photography. So these books and the eye opener to wildlife photography was this, because we had to do everything. Go in a jeep, go in slush and mud, where you'll probably sink up to your knee deep, but still have to get photos. You have to walk, you have to crawl. Sometimes you have to sit for 6 hours and get nothing, and sometimes you get chased. Sometimes all kinds of things happen. So it was quite an experience. There's been an explosion actually in India of wildlife tourism. And what happens with wildlife tourism is, it brings in, once you go into a forest as a general tourist with a little bit of wildlife attraction or attraction towards wildlife. The second thing somebody wants is, I need a good picture of a tiger, I need a good picture of an elephant or whatever. And then they start chasing that part, they buy equipment, they do a whole lot. And then that interest slowly builds. But today what has happened is, because of all this, a lot of people are doing safari photography, what I call as safari photography, because you go on a safari, you do stuff and come back. So there's a very thin line between safari photography and wildlife photography. And that is actually getting muddled today. A lot of people think by going on safari twice or thrice or 300 times in a jeep is wildlife photography. It is not. You may have to, you go in a jeep just to protect yourself, but that's not wildlife photography. So the whole thing has now become a little thing that I'm a wildlife photographer. It gives a bit of, it has a bit of, let's say a
glamour.
Yeah, glamour, a lot of glamour, but more than that, they also think that I've done something. I've shot an animal, or for fun. This is not for real killing, like the Maharajas did, or it was not game hunting. Today, that safari photography has become like game hunting. Instead of killing the animal, you're actually taking a picture of it. But the way the people chase is actually hurt sometimes when to look at those kind of trying to chase a particular image. So that is what actually brought me into wildlife photography, the passion to be out in the open, in nature, amidst nature, and try to get the best whatever picture of an animal or whatever you. But when I did these projects, I was shooting people, I was shooting landscapes, I had to shoot culture, I had to shoot food, I had to shoot various things.
To make a living.
When I did the book,
yeah,
and that still, doing the whole lot of things, which was shooting people, portraits, monuments, landscapes, that gave me immense joy too. And that came out as to me still my best book, okay, because there was a whole lot of genres which all culminated into one. But if you really ask me now, if you ask me one question as to what, there are two things which happens, all my other photography is probably for the head, but for the wildlife is from the heart. So that's the difference that I can put.
So the demand for wildlife photography for wildlife photographs, has it gone up since you started, or is it dwindling? And the people who need it, are they a discerning lot who can make out the difference between these two?
Yes. Okay. It's actually a tough question to answer, but let me tell you very honestly, like all genres of photography, wildlife photography is also lost or gotten lost in the jungle now. There are, I think, a lot of people who cannot distinguish a very good wildlife photograph from a normal one. A safari photographer from a vehicle would get a different angle, and a wildlife photographer probably gets it from a different angle. Now, that subtle difference is actually very few people really look for or look into and see what is the actual subtle difference between the two. And when they can't make out, the value of a photograph actually comes down. But there'll always be a phenomenal value for those exceptional wildlife photographs which have been shot or have been created in a manner which comes from here, as to how much of effort has gone into it. You can actually tell from a picture. So when that happens, there's a very small segment who really appreciates and understands this. Even storytelling has fallen a little bit because of, the changes in medium of stories being told. Stories now go on Instagram, it goes on. So there are very short stories. There are actually minute stories or micro stories.
And gone in a day.
So to do this, so people have to reinvent, whether he's a wildlife photographer or a fashion photographer or a travel, for example. They have to start looking at creating small little stories which will actually enthuse an Instagram user or a follower. Now that's the difference that we need to bring today. But if you take just one picture of a tiger or a leopard or a bear or an elephant or whatever, you take that picture and you say, okay, I'm going to now send this to a magazine or anybody who wants to publish this, there's no hope.
So speaking of that, what kind of avenues do you think are open for, and I'm this coming from a point of total ignorance, what are the other things that could be a source of revenue for the wildlife photographer?
See, even the revenue from books has fallen quite a lot. Nobody's buying, nobody's reading. A book, although it has its own charm of holding a paper and looking at beautiful pictures. There are two things to answer your question. One is how good a photographer you have been, and now how much of that photography you can adapt yourself using technology, the future technology. And the future technology could be equipment, it could be advances in equipment, or just something else, or the way you convey the same message which was probably going in a book now onto a story. And the storyline could be a small little story on Instagram, or you put it on your Facebook, but write it in such a manner that it's like a serial. So people have to look for it. So these are the added, let's say, talent or avenues that you need to actually build. And how do you build? If you have one, you do it yourself. Otherwise, you'll have to get help from somebody else. So the best way to actually make a living out of wildlife today cannot be by doing everything yourself. It has to be a collaborative effort with some writer who's somebody who's good in social media, so he'll do something. That's one. The second thing, there's an opportunity in creating and conducting a whole lot of wildlife tours, photography tours. But that was also getting very saturated because there's so many people doing it. Cox and Kings is announced that they will do wildlife photography tours. Now that's the kind of thing that everybody wants to do it. So that's another area where you need to find a niche. The third is obviously in terms of teaching and conducting workshops and giving out lectures and whatever else you can talk to. So there's a little bit of a touch and feel with the audience.
With humans.
Yeah, with the humans, and connect with them and bring. And most importantly, one of the things which I'll also touch upon is the fact that it's not just about one good wildlife photograph today. You need to have a photograph which will make a difference. When I say make a difference, it could be something that will show the world that you need to save this species for our own survival, or there is some grave danger to a certain species which will adversely affect the other species. And it could be a small little animal, or it could be a large bird, it could be a very big, large mammal. Because that's one of the things that we do. Or I personally have a small affinity towards a primate, a little primate called the slender loris. It's only about this much. It's smaller than a house cat. So that personal affinity for me is actually, I'm putting in a lot of effort trying to photograph that, create awareness amongst people. And there are two ways that can happen. One is you create a small little community which itself will protect that particular species. In our case, it's the slender loris. And then you can also have a little bit of income tourism from ecotourism, trying to showcase some of these species and say that you can and make people learn or know more about it. That becomes an education center. The other thing is the stories of conservation can be taken forward, for which there are two things. One is platforms are available, and second is you'll also start getting that recognition in terms of saying that, hey, I'm doing something for a particular species. You can give talks in many places, because conservation touches people's heart. I'm doing something somewhere. So you will have the opportunity to talk more about it in many places, but you should know what you're trying to tell them. But from a revenue perspective, you will have to build up a kind of a small little niche for yourself as to what you would be doing. And finally and eventually, if you tie in all the loose ends, the last piece of the puzzle could be that you could sell your images as fine art or as fine art print, because a lot of people do not print today. But it's going to come back. I mean, it's print is always there. It's nice to have a nice image on the wall, but yeah, it's harder to make a full 100% living from wildlife photography today.
So what kind of equipment did you start with, and what kind of equipment are you using now?
See, I started with the basic telephoto lenses, 70-300s and those. I'm talking about the time when there were not many lenses, the 70-200s and all. And then I went through a whole process of going through the best cameras. You buy the best professional equipment, the fastest shutters, then the longest lenses. I was using Canon for a long time, until very recently, or almost a year now, or a little more than a year, since I completely shifted over to Sony, because technology keeps changing. There were a lot of photographers who fell by the wayside when the entire technology moved from film to digital. So the biggest challenge was not about being a very good photographer. It's your ability to adapt to this changing technology. And today I see the same change happening. There's a shift in technology from just being a digital photography technology to mirrorless, and to what Sony is trying to bring and what they're trying to do in the future. So this transition, and very quick transition, is also very important. It's absolutely important to understand. And some of the technology changes that have come in using Sony that I'm using currently, one of which is the silent shutter. Okay, it's absolutely essential from a wildlife perspective to be quiet and silent in the forest. Earlier there were, instances where you would go cut, multi-frames, and it disturbs the animal. I mean, whatever it is. There were two things: either it would chase you and want to chase you away, or it will just walk away. So not giving you enough time to do your own things. Now with the silent shutter, I think I'm using a whole lot of that to my advantage. The second thing is the electronic shutter and the frame rate. Now 20 frames per second is mind-blowing actually, because it's almost like video. So when I shoot at 20 frames, especially of fast action, I have enough ability or chances to get them in the frames that I want. So this is one. And to just give you what I currently use, I use a Sony Alpha 9, and I'm using the G-Master 100-400 lens, which goes very well with it, with the two adapters. And believe me, earlier times I used to do a whole lot of things with 500mm, with 800mm, with converters, and the weight of that was really killing. It would be a huge burden, especially when you had to climb up, let's say, a rocky terrain, and we had to set up some cameras. In Gujarat it happened, and I had this 500s and huge. You need porters who actually take you up there. But with lighter equipment, two advantages: I don't have to pay for excess baggage, and the second is I can carry these lenses and cameras myself. And instead of hiring porters to bring you somewhere and have a full team of 3-4 people trying to go there, and the bear or the leopard or whatever will obviously run away looking at so many people.
So when you shoot wildlife, when you've got an animal in your frame, as a photographer, and speaking just from a photographic point of view, what is the most important thing for you?
See, we are always shooting under ambient light.
Right.
Just to remember that. I mean, it's very difficult to create the lighting that you really want. It's next to impossible. Sometimes it's possible a little bit, but not. You don't really have control. The one thing which I actually always look for is that one small little expression or behavior of the animal which attracts the attention of a human eye, because humans are used to seeing other humans emote, okay, through the eyes, body language, whatever, and speech and everything else, but they are not completely attuned towards the emotions or the way an animal's body language is. And I just want to bring that one small little bit out, which actually attracts the human mind and says, hey, wow, this is nice. That's it.
Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge with us.
Thank you, and thanks, Gorky. It was lovely chatting with you. I hope your channel also grows to become the biggest banyan tree, and sure does everything. So take the channel forward. Don't ever give up at any point in time. It's always hard to do any of these things, but you have a lovely initiative going, and it was my pleasure to have been here. So all the very best.
Thank you very much.
Hope it grows. Thank you.
If I was sitting outside and I'd be like, I don't have this lens, so I don't think I want to shoot, which as a photographer is a bad thing. I mean, you want to be shooting no matter what equipment you have on you.